Chapter 2 in the Boglehead textbook deals with basically the time value of money, although they don't show you the formulas or the process. They just introduce the concept and show how much you can earn if you earn a certain rate of return versus another rate of return. So basically, they're showing you how the more interest you can earn, the better off you're going to be, and then the longer you're willing to invest your money, the better off you're going to be. So basically, if you start earlier in your life investing, you'll be better off than if you wait till later. One of the first concepts that they introduce in the chapter is the rule of 72. And it's not a rule that I actually use in my daily life, but you'll probably hear about it at some point, so it's best to understand it. But basically, if you take the number 72 and you divide by the interest rate that you can earn, the answer that you'll get will approximate the number of years it will take your money to double. Oh, by the way, I am trying a new process with my recording, and hopefully my voice is clear and you can't hear it with the pen scratching as much. So basically, if I invest $1,000 at an annual rate of 10%, I can use this formula to figure out how long it's going to take my money to double. So I take 72, divide it by that 10% rate. Now normally, probably hereafter, if I use an interest rate in the formula, I convert it to a decimal. So normally I would put a decimal in front of the 10. But for this particular formula, you don't do that. I just take 72 divided by 10. I'll get 7.2. And so that's approximately how long it's going to take my money to double. And remember, it is approximate. It's approximate, but it works pretty well for rates that we normally see in the United States. I could even use this for inflation. So if inflation were 10%, it would take about 7.2 years for the price of a product to double due to inflation. The United States has pretty normal inflation rates, but some countries like Brazil, I know they've had inflation rates of like 60%, if not higher than that. But the higher your rate, the more inaccurate this rule of 72 becomes. It's fairly accurate for rates between 6% and 10%. But the further away from those rates you go, the lower than 6%, higher than 10%, the more inaccurate the formula becomes. That's one reason I don't use the rule of 72. Another reason is I'm after, a lot of times, not how long it's going to take my money to double, but maybe how long it's going to take $1,000 to turn into $20,000, not just $2,000. And then the formula is just a little more troublesome. But not quite. So let's just look to see what would happen, how long it's going to take this money to grow to more than 2,000. So here I am today. I've got $1,000. Basically, if it earns 10%, it's going to take 7.2 years to grow to $2,000. Another 7.2, which is going to put me to 14.4. It'll double again. It won't increase by $1,000 from 7.2 to 14.4. It'll double again. If it starts out at 2,000 here, it's going to double to 4,000. and another 7.2 years, which puts me at 21.6. It's going to double again, so that'll put me at 8,000. Another 7.2, which puts me at 28.8. It's going to double again, which puts me at 16,000. And another 7.2, which is what, 36. It's going to put me at 32,000. So if I wanted to know how long it was going to take my money, my 1,000 to grow to 20,000, this isn't going to tell me exactly. It's going to just tell me somewhere between 28.8 and 36 years, that's where 20,000 falls. So I just use a financial calculator to answer questions like this. I don't use the Rule of 72. But again, a lot of people are interested in that rule. They know that rule. And in certain ways, I guess it is handy. So what I would rather do is use a financial calculator. And I'm just going to do one more example. Actually, I can go ahead and use this example. So if I want to know how long it's going to take $1,000 to grow to $20,000 if I can earn 10% on it, we already know the answer is somewhere between 28.8 and 36. The formula that I would use, it's fairly simple. This I would consider a future value because it happens in the future relative to my $1,000 that I've got right now. The 1,000 I would consider a present value. So I'm going to use these abbreviations a lot in the class, FV and PV. The future value formula, it says that the future value is equal to the present value times 1 plus the rate that we can earn raised to the power of time. And a lot of times I'll just abbreviate this as R, or sometimes I for interest rate, or I'll use T for time, or N for number of time periods. But essentially, if I plug in 20,000 here as my future value, 1,000 here is my present value, the rate, this time rather than just using it as a straight 10 like we did in the Rule of 72 formula, I had said most of the time when you see me using rates and formulas, I convert them to decimals. I need to do that here. So the 10% rate becomes 0.1. I would add it to 1, and then I would raise that to the power of time. And time is the one thing in this equation that we don't know. So I just plug it in there. And then I could do some math, algebra, to solve for time here. But here's where I would essentially use my financial calculator. There are also what we call interest factor tables that I could just look this information up. So here I'm just going to use interest factor tables. I'm going to discuss this in the next lecture. Oops, let's just say or financial calculator. And I'll show you how to do both of those in the next lecture. Alright, let's say that you want to save $1 million by age 65. And you're earning 8% annually. How much would you have to save as a single sum or a lump sum I'll put how much would you have to deposit. as a lump sum to do this. Today to do this. So let's say you inherited $50,000 and you want to take some of that money today and spend it, and then the rest you want to set aside to grow to $1 million by the age of 65, and you're currently 20 years old. Is there any way that some amount less than $50,000 would grow to $1 million in 45 years if you earn 8%? The answer to that is yes, which is pretty cool. And so what I'm going to do is show you how much, that's not interest paid, it's interest earned. I'm going to start at a much later age. So let's say you're 60 and you need to set aside some amount to have $1 million only 5 years later, and you can earn 8% on that amount. You're going to have to put aside quite a bit of money to have it grow to $1 million in 5 years. And how much you'd have to set aside is $680,583. And again, that was calculated using this formula. Future value equals present value times 1 plus I to the n for a number of time periods. And essentially, if you take $680,583 times 1 plus 8% interest to the 5th year, that's going to give you $1 million. There might be a slight rounding there, but it's going to get you awfully close. So, if you put $680,000 aside when you're 60, it grows to $1 million 5 years later. I can calculate the interest that would be earned by taking $1 million minus the $680,583. That's going to be about $320,000. That's my approximation symbol, but it's not written very well. Now, if you started saving 10 years earlier, so put some money aside when you're 50 instead of 60, you wouldn't need to set as much money aside as the 60-year-old to have it worth $1 million by the time you're 65. Because this person has 15 years for the money to grow, whereas this person only had 5. So the 50-year-old would need to set aside $315,241. It'd be worth $1 million 15 years later. So if I take that $1 million, subtract the $315,241, this person would earn about $685,000 in interest. So the extra decade is letting them earn over twice as much interest as the 60-year-old. If somebody started when they're 40, they just put some money aside when they're 40 years old, they'd have 25 years to grow and earn interest. The 40-year-old would only have to set aside $146,018. So they would earn nearly $854,000 in interest. But if you're 20 and you put some money aside to help fund your retirement in the hopes of having $1 million when you retire, you would only have to put aside $31,328. Over the next 45 years, that money would grow to be worth $1 million. So you would have earned approximately $969,000 in interest. So, when you are young, time is so on your side in terms of earning interest and the time value of money. That's one reason I really try to encourage young people to start saving money for retirement in their 20s, if you do that, you really shouldn't, if you do that diligently, you really shouldn't have a significant amount of difficulty saving several $1,000,000 for retirement. Now, most people don't fund their retirement by putting lump sums into an account when they're 20. And again, this is what I call a lump sum or a single sum. If you only put $31,328 into an account and earned 8%, you never touched it. So you never spent any money from it, you never added any more to it, you just let it earn interest. 45 years later, you'd be worth $1,000,000. This is a lump sum calculation, but it's not how most people save money for retirement. Most people save money for retirement by putting little, small amounts aside every paycheck, so every 2 weeks or so. That's called an annuity. And an annuity, the formal definition is a cash flow. So it could be cash that you're receiving or cash that you're paying. That is always the same amount. And it's always the same time interval apart. So my car payment, my house payment, they're both annuities because they're always the same amount every month and they are always paid on the same day of each month. So those are both cash flows coming from me, but deposits that I make into my retirement account and I get paid like on the 10th and 25th of each month, and as long as I don't get a raise, the amount that goes to my retirement is a certain dollar amount every 2 weeks approximately. So that would be an annuity that I'm depositing into my retirement account. So let's look at an annuity of $3,000. That's deposited every year for 40 years. And this time we're going to compare different rates that you can earn. I had mentioned earlier that my savings account pays 1/2 of 1% a year. That's an extremely low rate. It's not even keeping up with inflation, which averages about 3% a year, if not a little bit more. So any money that I have in my savings account is actually losing purchasing power because of inflation. Some people, though, the only reason that I have money in my savings account is because a savings account is essentially riskless. I know I'm not going to lose any money, and I'd like to have money for, little bitty emergencies, which I'll put in quotes. And at least it's earning 0.5%, whereas my checking account doesn't earn anything. But there are some people who are simply unwilling to invest in risky things, even when they're saving money for retirement. And that is something I hope you are not guilty of. Because again, money that is in my savings account is losing purchasing power. So it's actually hurting you to invest that money in a savings account rather than, let's say, a bond mutual fund, which earns fairly low returns, but better than a savings account and probably better than inflation. So at least you're going to maintain your purchasing power instead of lose purchasing power. But at any rate, I'm going to contrast somebody who is very risk averse. They're only willing to invest in low risk things, and because of that, they're earning very low returns. So somebody who's got their money in a mix of, let's say, a savings account, certificates of deposits, and some bonds. But combined, they're earning only 4%. Whereas somebody who's willing to take more risk, maybe they've got a little bit of their money in equities, a lot of their money in bonds. Whereas somebody who's willing to take more risk, has all their money in equity, they might be equity, again, stocks. They might be willing to put all their money in that. Maybe they can earn 10%. I'm going to have each person putting in $3,000 a year for 40 years. I want to show you how much difference there can be in a person's ending wealth. So the person who puts in, and actually let me emphasize, each of these persons is investing the same amount, and $3,000 after 40 years, they will each be putting aside $120,000. But they're just not doing it in a lump sum. They're doing it in small increments, but $3,000 a year over 40 years. The person who's only earning 4% will have $285,000 and $77. $285,077. Of that, $120,000 is what they put in, so you can see they're earning about $165,000 in interest. The person who's willing to invest in riskier assets and earn 7%, they'll have nearly $600,000, $598,905. But the person who's willing to take the most risk and they're earning 10% a year, they'll have almost, $1,327,778. So they're earning a huge amount of interest. So if you start early, invest consistently in risky assets, I'm not saying invest foolhardily in risky assets. You can manage the risk of risky assets by diversifying, choosing a nice array of equities across the world, of companies in different sizes and different industries, a lot of variety and diversity. That's going to help manage your risk. You can end up a millionaire by the time you retire. If you invest more than $3,000 a year, and $3,000 a year isn't, it might seem hard to come up with that much money now, but $3,000 a year divided by 12 months in the year, that's $250. If you could find an employer who matched you dollar for dollar, so basically your employer contributed half, you'd only have to come up with $125. Now, you will probably need more than $1.3 million to survive the route retirement. You'll probably need $2 or $2.5 million, but it is doable if you start in your 20s. Now, to be a boglehead, and a boglehead is someone who follows the ideas that John Bogle has. John Bogle is I've seen him called Jack, and I've also seen him called John. I am not actually quite sure which one is his name. But he developed the Vanguard Investment Company. And you'll see the name Vanguard a lot throughout the quarter. Vanguard is very well known for having a huge variety of mutual funds. I'll explain what mutual funds are in Chapter 4. And they have very low fees, extremely low fees. So John Bogle was a huge fan of diversification and low fees. So the Vanguard Investment Company offers, I want to say several hundred, I'm not sure the exact number, but a variety of mutual funds that can diversify you easily and cheaply. And the bogleheads are people who agree with that investment philosophy. Diversify and don't pay high fees. And basically you can manage your own money. You don't need to pay a person $250 an hour to give you advice, because it's really not that hard. After this class, you should know enough to be able to manage your own retirement fund and your own investments in other areas. But essentially, there are 4 qualities that the bogleheads believe investors should have. The first is that they should plan. Estimate how much money you think you're going to need in your retirement to fund your retirement years. Plan when you'd like to retire. Do you want to retire when you're 50 or 40 or 55 or what? Make that plan. Calculate your estimated financial needs and then make a plan that's going to get you to where you want to be. It's not probably going to happen by accident. And then you've got to commit to that plan. Like I just said, it won't happen by accident. You're going to have to diligently put aside money to help fund your retirement needs or your whatever your desires are, a down payment for a house, buy a new car, or whatever. It is going to require patience as well. It takes time for money to grow. When I first opened my retirement account at I think I was 25, and I should have started a little bit earlier, but I didn't. I remember at the end of the first year, I looked at my statement, and it was only, I don't know, $1,000 or something like that in it. And I was like, man, that's going to take forever for it to get to be worth anything. But at this point in my life, my retirement account is the largest asset that I got, and it'll probably always be that case now, because it's gotten so big that it's earning interest, and the interest that earns adds up to a decent amount. I mean, it was always earning interest, but earning interest on $1,000 isn't a whole lot of interest. But when you earn interest on a much bigger amount, it helps it grow quite a bit. It just took 25 years for me to get there. And then it's going to take long-term thinking. I was talking to someone the other day, and he was talking about how he wanted to buy a new Xbox, but he doesn't really need a new Xbox. And so I was trying to convince him, take that money and invest it. And I'm not quite sure how much an Xbox costs, but let's assume it's about $400. And I said, I know that's only, I'll put that in quotes, that's only $400 right now. And if you blow it today on an Xbox, it won't seem like you've lost a whole lot. But what if you took that $400, you invested it, you could earn 10% on it after 50 years, because this person was fairly young. What could that be worth? And the answer is $46,956. And for him, that $400,000, that's a fairly decent portion of his monthly income. But look what it can grow to, and look at how it can benefit you in the future. So try thinking long term. It's important. Another thing they discuss in the book is what qualities do people who retire as millionaires tend to exhibit. So they basically looked at a lot of millionaires who had over $1 million in their retirement savings, and they interviewed them and gave them some tests surveyed them and just tried to figure out what qualities that a good proportion of them had. So, were they really smart? Were they quite intelligent? And the answer was no, they weren't any more intelligent than the average person. Did they generate a lot of income during their working years? So were they making $100,000, $200,000 a year? The answer was no. Quite a bit of them made very little money. Did they inherit a lot of money? And the answer was no. The common characteristic that millionaire retirees tended to have was they consistently saved a portion of every single paycheck that they got. It didn't matter if their paycheck was $400 or $4,000. They consistently saved a portion of it. And my guess is, and I really wish they had mentioned this in the report, was at what age did they start saving for their retirement? My guess is most of them started when they were quite young. And by quite young, I mean in their 20s. One strategy that they mention in the Boglehead textbook is, I think I mentioned that the Boglehead suggests that you save about 20% of your paycheck. And that might be a whole lot to just, like if you're not saving any at all, to jump right into saving 20% of your paycheck, that's a pretty steep portion to save right away. So they suggested saving, let's say you make $300. My pen just ran out of ink and I can't see what I'm writing. Thankfully, it still records my handwriting. But let's say you make $300 a paycheck. They suggest starting out and saving 1%. So 1% of $300 is $3. And then the next paycheck, save 2%. So 2% of $300 is $6. And the next paycheck, save 3%. And by the end of, let's say you get paid once a month. By the end of the first month, the year, you're saving 12%. And that's a pretty decent portion of your paycheck to save. You might need to go up all the way to 20%, if not more, to accomplish your goals, though. But that's why it's important to do what they mentioned earlier, which is to plan. Figure out how much you think you're going to need and how much you're going to have to save to get there. And it also hinges on what rate you can earn and what investments you're willing to, or I should say, what risk you're willing to take, because that's going to drive what investments you're willing to make. Now, the book also discusses how can we save money. Like, what little strategies might we do that can boost our savings? And one thing that they suggest, and I know this isn't rocket science, but sometimes it helps to just talk about it. Cut out unnecessary expenses. It might be that you're spending money on things that you just don't realize how much it all adds up to. And again, my pen has run out of ink. I can't see what I'm writing, but I don't want to pause and go find a new ink cartridge, so I'm just going to roll with this. It still is recognizing my handwriting. If I were in class with you right now and looking out over my audience, I'm pretty sure I would spy probably 5 or so people who had cups from Starbucks on their desk. Were those Starbucks coffees are expensive. So no Starbucks. If we spend about $5 on a single latte, let's say from Starbucks, I know they're going to have their pumpkin spices in the store soon, and I love those. It's hard for me not to buy one. But if I spend $20 on one of those every day that I go to work each month, and there are 20 working days in the month, that's $100 a month. And if I do that for 12 months out of the year, that's $1,200 that I'm spending just on lattes. If I were to invest that money, and this is annually, so if I were to invest that money over 30 years, I'd have to use a financial calculator to crunch this, and I actually did it already, so I have the number in front of me. In the next lecture, I'll show you how to do this calculation yourself. But if I took $1,200, and instead of buying lattes with it, I invested it in something that paid me 10% a year, and I did this every year for 30 years, I have $197,393 extra. That's a hefty amount that is going down the drain from drinking Starbucks. Another thing that you could do is commit future raises to savings. So, for example, I am probably going to get a 3% raise this academic year. And at the moment I can live without, I don't need that extra 3% for survival purposes. I'm surviving just fine without it. So what I could do is commit that entire 3% to savings and not spend it. That's a great policy to have. Or you might agree to spend just half of it on boosting your standard of living and putting the other half aside for retirement savings. A third thing you could do is shop for used items rather than new items. So get a used car, get used clothes, used electronics. That can really cut your expenses quite a bit. And then one major thing is to buy less house, and I'm phrasing it kind of strangely, but less house than your agent thinks you can afford. A real estate agent gets paid a percentage of the house that you buy. So if you buy a house that costs $100,000, they usually get 3%. So they would only get $3,000 versus if you bought a house that cost $300,000, they would get $9,000 from the sale of that house. So they're going to argue that you purchased a more expensive house. And the general thing that I've read and heard is that if you take your income, let's say you make $50,000, if you triple that, then that's about the size of the most expensive house that you can afford. I think that's a little too aggressive in terms of it's a little bit too expensive. I think if you did something like that, you might find yourself becoming what they call house poor. You have bought the house and you can afford to make your payments, but you don't have that much money left over to fund other things that you might like to do. And this is actually a good time to bring up the idea of mortgages. You know what I'm going to do? Because I just can't see what I'm writing at all. I can't even tell at what line of the paper that I'm on anymore. I'm going to stop this video and I'll start a new one in a little bit.